Snow remembers what hearts try to forget. Up here, in the quiet miles of white, a trail guide lives alone with a guilt he will not name. They say a rider vanished on this mountain weeks ago, and the mare she left behind now stands frozen in place, breath trembling in the cold. When he's asked to help her move again, he feels the old storm rise in his chest, the one that took his sister's life. But as the wind howls through pines and the world turns white once more, he sees something in the mare's stillness that mirrors his own. Step by shivering step, he must choose, keep standing in the past, or walk into the thaw. Snow drifted across the ridge like slow-moving smoke, blurring the line between sky and earth. Far below, lanterns bobbed through the dark, swinging from the hands of a search party picking their way along a narrow trail. Wind carved hollows into the drifts and scattered pine needles across frozen rock. At the edge of a clearing, a chestnut mare stood perfectly still, her breath rising in short, trembling clouds, reins draped in the snow beside her. Frost clung to her whiskers, and her dark eyes stared straight ahead, unblinking. From higher ground, the trail guide watched the scene unfold. He leaned against a frost-bitten pine, arms crossed tight against the cold, the collar of his jacket pulled up around his jaw. The wind seethed through the branches above him, but he barely noticed. Storms had taken too much already. He saw the mare's legs quiver, the subtle shift of her weight, then nothing. She would not move. Below, the search captain knelt, his lantern casting a pale circle of gold around the horse's hooves. He spoke softly, voice muffled by the wind, but the mare only flattened her ears and shuddered once. A second lantern beam swung across the snow, revealing hoofprints that wandered in confused arcs before abruptly vanishing into the storm's white churn. No human footprints followed. The guide's jaw tightened. Snowstorms like this one were never kind. He had learned that the hard way. When the party finally coaxed the mare down the trail, they guided her toward town. She planted her hooves twice, refusing, then relented with a frightened snort. Lanterns receded through the trees until their glow became a dim heartbeat in the dark. The guide turned away, ready to disappear into the forest's quiet. But a voice rose behind him. "We could use you," the captain called, breath curling. "She won't move for anyone." The guide stopped. Silence gnawed at the spaces between snowflakes. Behind his ribs an old ache stirred. He exhaled once, slow and heavy, then walked toward them. The mare watched him approach without blinking. Her ears tipped forward, recognition, or memory, trembling in their angles. He reached out a gloved hand, palm open. For a long moment the world held its breath. Then her muzzle brushed his palm, hesitant, like a secret shared through touch. "She's been standing up there since the storm broke," the captain murmured. "Riders missing." The guide's eyes slid toward the ridge, where the storm had swallowed the path days before. Snow whispered along the branches, and something cold edged deeper than winter. He curled his fingers gently beneath the mare's reins. "All right," he said quietly. "Let's get you warm." As they walked, the mare stayed close, steps tight, as if afraid the snow would take her again. Each hoofbeat echoed a memory he tried not to hear. Wind blew hard against their backs, and somewhere in its howl lingered a voice he once knew. Ahead, the valley lights flickered like candles, waiting. The trail guide lived in a cabin tucked between two leaning pines, their branches bowed low by winter weight. Smoke curled from the chimney in a thin grey ribbon, and light flickered behind frosted windows. When he led the mare inside the small paddock beside the cabin, she halted at the gate, trembling. Her eyes drifted to the snow-shadowed tree line, as if expecting someone to step through. He whispered to her softly, voice grainy with disuse, and only when he placed his hand against her neck did her quivering slow. Inside the stable lean-to, he lined the walls with blankets and straw, brushing snow from her coat in slow, meditative strokes. Her muscles quaked beneath his touch, ribs lifting and falling in short, uneven heaves. A single saddle mark lay pressed into her fur, darker than the rest, stretching like a bruise. He untied the reins gently, hanging them on a hook where she could see them. She stared at them for a long time before lowering her head into the hay. Morning rose pink along the horizon, glinting through icicles that hung like glass teeth. The guide stepped outside, breath blooming into fog, and watched two chickadees hop along the railing. The mare lifted her head to greet him, one ear flicking forward. He offered her oats from his gloved palm. After a hesitant sniff, she ate, crunching thoughtfully. Trust, he knew, arrived in quiet gestures. As he worked, memories drifted like flakes through his thoughts. His sister had loved mornings like these. She would whistle softly to their old mare, coaxing her to step onto half-frozen trails where light pooled like honey between spruce trunks. He had often chosen the safer paths, caution curdling in his stomach, even when adventure glowed behind her eyes. She'd laugh and call him careful, but her voice held no reproach, only warmth. Later that day, he saddled a gentler horse and rode into town to gather supplies. Snowmelt dripped from roofs, though the cold still clung stubbornly to the air. Whispers trailed behind him like smoke. The missing rider, she'd been young, daring, too bold for these winter trails. Some claimed she fled. Others swore something darker hid along the ridge. The guide kept his eyes down, shouldered silence like a pack, and felt the weight of the mare's trembling follow him. When he returned, he found the mare pacing the fence line, hooves carving arcs into the frost. She stopped only when she saw him, ears pinned in concentration. He opened the gate slowly and she stepped forward, nudging his shoulder as though urging him somewhere. He placed a steadying hand on her muzzle, and her breath eased. Day after day, he brushed her coat, finding small scars hidden beneath the fur, scrapes from ice, from bramble, from fear. He'd check her hooves while she kept her gaze locked on distant slopes. In the evenings they'd stand together under the lantern's glow, the flame painting soft gold against her chestnut coat. Her heartbeat thrummed beneath his palm, steadying a part of him he'd forgotten how to calm. One afternoon, as he trimmed her mane, a memory surged, his sister's laughter echoing off snowy canyon walls, her scarf waving like a banner behind her. He had warned her about that storm, begged her not to ride, but she'd insisted the trail would be fine. When she never returned, winter swallowed every trail of warmth he'd once known. The mare snorted softly, vibrating through his bones. He blinked, pushing the memory back into its cold corner. Rumors deepened in town. Supplies pinned to notice boards bore sketches of the missing rider's face. Voices behind closed doors questioned why the mare survived when her rider did not. A few eyes turned toward his cabin, suspicious, but he ignored them. Silence was easier than explanation. One evening the wind died, leaving only a hush across the valley. He stepped beside the mare, placing his forehead against her neck. She exhaled, warm and steady, and for a breath's length, the storm inside him softened. In the quiet, before snow returned, man and horse stood as two shadows stitched together by loss, and the first threads of fragile trust beginning to hold. The first warning arrived as a restless hush, creeping through the tree line. The mare lifted her head abruptly, ears pricked toward the mountains, breath feathering into the cold. The trail guide followed her gaze, watching the distant sky darken like bruised fruit. Snow clouds gathered in heavy tiers, stacking upon one another until the horizon blurred beneath their weight. He felt the temperature drop against his jaw, the air tightening, sharpening. By late afternoon, the wind pressed harder, rattling the cabin shutters in quick, impatient bursts. Chickens huddled beneath the eaves, and the neighbouring pines groaned at their roots. The mare paced the paddock restlessly, hooves biting crescents into the frost. Her body trembled, as if memory itself thrashed beneath her skin. He approached slowly, running his gloved hand along her neck, murmuring assurances that barely escaped his lips. But the cold bite in the air carried more than weather. It carried echoes. By nightfall the storm unfurled fully. Snow slashed sideways as if thrown by unseen hands, whirling and snarling around the cabin. Visibility collapsed into a wall of white. The mare refused to enter the shelter until lightning cracked open the sky like splitting wood. She reared once, then bolted into the stable lean-to, sides heaving, eyes wide with primal fear. The guide stood at the doorway, boots planted against the wind's push, staring into the blizzard's maw. His chest tightened, memories clawing back with bitter nails. He had seen this storm before, felt it gnaw at the world like hunger. The night his sister vanished, the sky had worn the same twisted expression. He had begged her to wait, to stay, to let dawn soften the trail. But her adventurous fire burned too bright to be dimmed. A fist hammered at his cabin door, voices lost beneath the gale. He shut the stable gate gently, then hurried through swirling white. The search captain stood bundled in heavy oilcloth, 2 others behind him, goggles rimmed with frost. Another rider, spotted near the ridge, the captain bellowed over the wind. Could be the missing girl. Tracks lead toward the old ranger cabin. The words dropped like stones in his stomach. The old ranger cabin was miles up, near sheer drop-offs iced slick as glass. He swallowed hard. "We need your help," the captain continued. "You know those trails better than anyone." The guide's breath caught. His heart thudded against old guilt, stirring it awake. Could he face that ridge again? Could he watch another vanish into a storm's throat? Then he felt it. The mare's stare from behind him, dark eyes fixed like lanterns. She stomped once, snorting, breath hot in the cold. Her entire frame shook, but she did not turn away. "I'll saddle her," the guide said, voice low. The captain hesitated. "She hasn't moved since we found her." "She'll move now," he answered, already gripping the reins. Inside the stable, he slipped the saddle onto her trembling back. She flinched at first contact, but allowed the cinch to tighten. He stepped into the stirrup, settling into the seat like sliding into an old memory. The mare trembled, then exhaled deeply, as though releasing something trapped for days. They plunged into the storm. Snow whipped across his face, freezing to his lashes. The mare moved stiffly at first, hooves uncertain on hidden ice, but gradually her stride lengthened. Something pulled her forward, an invisible thread tied to her heart. Through the trees, the old ranger cabin revealed itself, a ghostly shape hunched against the storm's fury, windows boarded like shut eyes. A flicker of lantern light waved through one cracked panel. He dismounted, boots sinking deep into drifted snow, and pushed through the door. Inside, warmth battled the cold in flickering bursts. The missing rider, her jacket torn, fingers white with frostbite, sat curled near the hearth, face pale but eyes burning with stubborn fire. She blinked at him, amazement bleeding into relief. "I thought—"
"No one would come?" she rasped. "We're here," he said,
nodding to the captain and his crew as they crowded inside. But outside, the mare screamed, a sharp, keening sound that sliced through the cabin's warmth. The guide spun, rushing out into the swirling dark. The mare's hooves scrambled across the icy ridge, her body jerking backward as if something unseen pulled her. Chains of memory clamped around her legs, and then he saw it, hoofprints leading toward the ravine, where a slab of ice hung like a blade waiting to fall. With dawning horror, he understood what had happened. The missing rider had tried to cross that ravine alone, the ice collapsing beneath her. The mare had tried to pull her back and failed. Another scream tore through the storm, and the mare lurched dangerously close to the edge. He dashed forward, grabbing her reins, boots sliding across frost-sheened rock. The mare bucked, terror drowning her senses. "Easy," he whispered, breath shaking.
"I'm here," she stilled, trembling violently.
Snow plastered her mane to her neck, icicles dangling like shards. Behind him, the captain scrambled toward the ravine's lip, lantern raised. A broken scarf fluttered beneath a sheet of cracked ice. The same color his sister once wore. The world collapsed inward. He stared into the frozen pit, guilt crushing his ribs. 2 disappearances, 2 storms, 2 chances he hadn't taken. The captain turned. "We'll come back at dawn. We can recover her properly." "We have proof she made it this far," the guide nodded numbly. The mare pressed her head into his shoulder, shaking from cold and memory. The storm roared again, winds shrieking through the canyon. They huddled inside the old cabin through the night, listening to the roof groan under weight. Snow sealed the door, entombing them in white silence. Wind gnawed at seams. The fire guttered low. As dawn crept through boarded slats, the storm relented. The searchers opened the door with shovels, forcing daylight inside. Outside, the mare shook snow from her coat and stamped the ground, breath billowing. She turned her head toward the ridge, toward the truth buried beneath the thaw. And the guide knew. Choices made in storms never stayed buried forever. In the days that followed, the storm's remnants clung stubbornly to the mountains, stacking frost along every branch. The cabin door groaned each time the guide pushed it open, resisting like an old wound that had never fully closed. Snow draped the world in quiet, and that silence felt heavier than the wind ever had. The mare paced the paddock with deliberate slowness, steps careful, as if afraid her hooves might crack the earth open. Each time she circled near the fence facing the ridge, her gait faltered, a memory snagging her pulse. Inside, the guide warmed his hands near the stove, palms open to the flame. He watched steam curl from his gloves, the heat only half chasing away the cold that had rooted beneath his ribs. The missing rider's recovery had shaken the town awake, whispers blooming like frost flowers on windows. Questions sharpened.
Why had he not guided her sooner?
Why was the mare frozen in place? Why had storms tied knots in his courage? The mare's presence didn't soften the rumors. If anything, she became a symbol, survivor, witness, unanswered question. Still, each morning she greeted him, nose brushing his sleeve with tentative familiarity. Her breath warmed the chill from his coat the way words never could. One afternoon, he led her into the forest clearing behind the cabin. The canopy held the last fragments of ice, dropping them in soft, tinkling cascades. The mare stiffened at first, ears swiveling as if listening for hoofbeats that never came. He ran a brush along her flank, feeling the faint ridges of healed scars beneath the bristles. She shivered at his touch, but her eyes softened. In that softening, he glimpsed something like forgiveness, too quiet to name. Whispers from town drifted up the mountain in subtle ways. Travelers asked probing questions at his gate. A pair of ranchers lingered near his fence line, murmuring about negligence, about how his sister's disappearance had mirrored the rider's fate too closely to be coincidence. He ignored them, turning instead to the mare's quiet tremors, grounding himself in the way her breath fogged against his forearm. At night, sleep fragmented into shards. Dreams blurred storm with storm, scarf with scarf, hoofbeats with human footsteps. His sister's laughter echoed through them, bright, defiant, and then broke mid-note as icy winds swallowed her voice. Sometimes he woke to find the mare standing near his window, head lowered, her silhouette a dark softness against the snow's glow. She watched him with patient eyes as though keeping vigil. He'd step outside, leaning against her shoulder, feeling the steady rise and fall of her breath. Something about her presence calmed the ghosts, if only briefly. One morning, the search captain returned with heavy boots and heavier news. The melted ridge had revealed remnants of the rider's final decisions: abandoned supplies, a snapped rope, a desperate attempt to return across thinning ice. The handful of artifacts recovered only deepened the mystery. The captain's eyes lingered on the guide's face. "You know these trails better than anyone," he said slowly. "If you saw something, forgot something, now's the time to speak." But the guide's voice locked behind his teeth. Memory chained him like frost around his lungs. After the captain left, the mare bristled, tail flicking sharply. She kicked once at the snowbank as if to banish lingering doubt. The guide stroked her neck, whispering apologies meant for two people now, one buried by time, one buried by storm. Isolation thickened around him. Neighbors stopped waving. Conversation stilled when he passed through market stalls. Even the trees held their breath when he walked between them, branches curling inward like accusations. But the mare stayed. In the late afternoons when the shadows... Thaw came quietly at first. A thin ribbon of meltwater traced down the mountain spine, dripping through the trees with a soft, persistent rhythm. The mare lifted her head each time a droplet fell, ears tilting as though listening for footsteps in the sound. The guide stepped outside and blinked against the pale morning light, noticing how the world had shifted, ice thinning, branches shedding their crystalline burdens. Winter had begun to loosen its grip. That morning, the mare did not pace. Instead, she stood facing the ridge, tail still, posture alert. The guide noticed the change immediately, a subtle readiness like a breath held too long. He approached her with the halter, expecting the familiar resistance, but she lowered her head willingly. Something in her had settled, not entirely, but enough to move forward. They walked along the lower trail, snow soft beneath their boots and hooves. The air carried the faint scent of pine sap and damp earth as shadows shrank beneath cautious sunlight. The mare moved with measured steps, neck extended, nostrils quivering as though she were following a thread of memory through the trees. The guide followed her focused, trusting her hesitation more than his own certainty. As they continued, meltwater carved narrow channels along the trail, whispering past downed branches. Birds returned to the canopy, chirping in cautious fragments. It felt like the first notes of a forgotten song. The mare paused occasionally, head turning toward distant ridges, ears flicking in small, decisive motions. She was leading him somewhere, though she likely didn't know where until they were already closer. They reached a clearing rimmed with tall spruce, their trunks beaded with thawed droplets. At the center, sunlight glinted off the ice, revealing a shallow ravine where the snow had peeled back like lifting cloth. The mare stiffened, breath shuddering. Her front leg pawed the ground, scraping once, twice. The guide followed her gaze and saw fabric tangled beneath a crust of ice. He knelt, brushing frost aside. A torn saddlebag lay half-crushed, leather stiff from cold and torn at the seams. Next to it, a fragment of scarf lay frozen to the ground, its pattern achingly familiar. His breath hitched. It wasn't the same scarf his sister had worn, but the resemblance pricked at memory like needles. The mare stepped closer, muzzle brushing the scarf. She whickered softly, a sound laced with recognition and grief. The guide closed his eyes, letting the truth bloom slowly. The missing rider had been chasing answers, walking the same path his sister had taken that fateful night. The mountain hadn't been cruel. It had been indifferent. When he rose, the mare pressed her head into his shoulder, steadier than she had been in weeks. He leaned into the warmth of her neck, feeling the echo of heartbeats through thin winter fur. Her trembling was different now, not panic, but release. Clouds drifted overhead, thinning to reveal a patch of blue sky. He remembered the last conversation with his sister, her insistence that storms could be survived if you kept moving. Fear had rooted him then. He realized he'd passed that stillness to the mare, two beings frozen by loss. The guide exhaled slowly, watching the steam trail away. He had never forgiven himself for not riding beside his sister. But here, at the ravine's edge, the mare nudged him forward. Her eyes held something unspoken. Movement was not betrayal. It was continuation. They lingered there, the silence no longer smothering but contemplative. When the mare stepped backward, she did so calmly. The guide took the reins, following her lead, as they began the slow return down the mountain. Their pace was unhurried, as though each step stitched a tear in the world's fabric. Halfway home, they paused at a fallen log. Meltwater dripped from icicles, pattering onto moss with a gentle rhythm. He ran his hand along the mare's neck, noticing how her muscles no longer trembled beneath his touch. She chewed thoughtfully, breath steady. For the first time, he felt her trust settle not out of necessity, but choice. He spoke softly, voice rough from disuse.
I should have gone with her. I should have walked that trail beside her. The words floated into the air, settling like thawed snow.
The mare flicked her ears, listening, and in that listening, he found a mirror. Back at the cabin, the search captain waited, boots dripping. The guide showed him the saddlebag and scuffed fragments. Relief washed across the captain's face, though sorrow lingered behind his eyes. "This will help her family," he murmured. "They'll sleep better knowing she wasn't lost without reason." When the captain left, the guide returned to the paddock. The mare stood quietly, posture relaxed. He leaned against the fence, watching the sun dip low. Colors bled across the sky, pinks and pale golds like warm breath against cold glass. The mare turned, eyes catching the light, reflecting a glimmer of dawn. In that moment, he saw himself reflected, quiet, uncertain, thawing. He stepped into the paddock and rested his forehead against her neck, the way someone leans against a trusted door frame. Her breath puffed against his sleeve, steady and sure. Somewhere deep beneath the layers of winter, something shifted. Not a breaking, but a beginning. When night settled, they stood beneath the whispering pines. Snowflakes drifted lazily, soft as ash but warm in intention. The mare's stance was no longer a statue carved by fear. She was present, awake, ready. And for the first time since the storm that swallowed his sister, he felt ready too. Snowmelt pooled in shallow rivulets along the trail, whispering through pine needles as if carrying secrets downstream. The guide stood outside the paddock at dawn, watching the mare stretch her neck toward the mountains. Her ears flicked at distant echoes, no longer pinned to her skull in fear, but attentive, curious. The ice around them was breaking, not just on the ground, but somewhere deeper. He saddled her gently, feeling her ribs expand with a long, steady breath. She no longer flinched at the girth, no longer froze at the weight. Instead, she shifted her hooves, testing her balance, as though preparing for something long overdue. The guide patted her neck once and mounted carefully, letting her choose the pace. Their path wound through thawing drifts and narrow passes that clung to the mountainside. Meltwater dripped from overhanging rocks, tapping steadily like a heartbeat. The mare's ears rotated, catching each sound, distinguishing wind from water, memory from warning. The guide's hands rested lightly on the reins. For once, he wasn't pushing her forward. She pulled him, step by sure step, toward the ridge. In town, uncertainty swirled. Families gathered near bulletin boards plastered with half-faded notices. The missing riders' relatives stood in the cold, clutching thin coats around them. When the guide offered the recovered belongings, the saddlebag and scarf fragments, relief sagged their shoulders. Tears traced warm lines down cold cheeks. Gratitude softened the stiff suspicion that had shadowed him for weeks. "I searched," he murmured, voice low. "Too late, but I searched." They nodded, forgiveness growing like buds beneath frost. It wasn't complete, but it was a start. Back at the cabin, he brushed the mare's coat beneath a shaft of sunset, watching orange light bloom along her flank. Her winter coat shed in small tufts, revealing a sleeker chestnut beneath. She leaned into the brush, eyes half-lidded. He smiled despite himself. Small, crooked, but real. Yet each night his dreams still burned white with storm-bright memory. He saw his sister's silhouette riding ahead, scarf streaming, laughter swallowed by wind. The mare galloped beside him, echoing that pursuit. But every time the dream reached the ravine, he woke gasping, tangled in sweat and blankets. One evening, as dusk melted into indigo, the search captain returned with a lantern dimmed by distance. "We'll need help with the recovery," he said quietly. "Not tonight, but soon." "The thaw's bringing things to the surface." The guide's throat tightened. He nodded. After the captain left, the mare whinnied softly, brushing her muzzle against his sleeve. He rested his hand atop her head, fingers sinking into warm fur. "I should have gone with her," he whispered, voicing the truth that had gnawed him hollow. The mare blinked slow, eyes reflecting lantern light. He spent the next days preparing for the climb to the ravine, checking rope, sharpening crampons, oiling leather. The mare mirrored his energy, trotting more confidently around the paddock, tail lifting in short, spirited arcs. The day they set out, sunlight scattered across the trail, glinting on meltwater like shifting mirrors. The climb was grueling. Snow softened beneath their boots, hiding treacherous ice. The guide's breath came hard, frosting in the air. The mare's hooves found secure purchase where his boots slipped, guiding him around slick angles, her instincts sharper than any map. Twice he faltered. Twice she shifted her weight and steadied him with a subtle press of shoulder. As they ascended, the forest thinned, exposing sky that blazed pale blue above. The wind sighed across the ridge, carrying the faint scent of pine sap and thawed earth. It was the same ridge his sister had loved, where she'd pointed out hidden trails and secret hollows. But he had always hung back, fearing what lay beyond. Now he followed. When they reached the ravine, the thaw had peeled back, layers of frost, like pages turning. The broken ice sheet revealed twisted saddlebags, fragments of leather straps, a bent stirrup. The guide knelt, palms pressed into wet earth, eyes stinging. The mare stood behind him, breath warm against his back, ears rotating softly. He gathered the remnants with care, each piece a final punctuation mark on a story cut short. Tears pooled, falling onto the frost-dark ground. "You didn't fail her," he murmured to the mare, voice cracking. She tried to turn back. "You tried to keep her." His fingers shook.
"We both did the best we could." The mare nudged him firmly, pushing him to his feet. That push broke something open. Together they descended the mountain.
The guide brought the recovered belongings to the captain, voice steadier now. He explained the trail conditions where the ice had thinned. He offered to help chart new warning markers along dangerous paths. The captain nodded, grateful. Later, word spread through town. Murmured suspicion faded into murmured thanks. Some villagers brought blankets or supplies to his cabin gate. Children peeked through the fence at the mare, eyes wide with awe. One left a sugar cube on the post. The mare sniffed it delicately, lips curling into something like surprise before crunching happily. But redemption wasn't a single climb. It was stitched from many smaller steps. The guide began riding the mare along broader trails, marking hazards with bright cloth tied to birch branches. He installed wooden posts where snow swallowed treacherous dips. Families waved quietly from porches, pride and relief brightening their faces. Each time he passed, whispers softened. One afternoon near the ravine's lower edge, he encountered a boy staring into the meltwater, eyes brimming. The boy's older sister had vanished years ago on another ridge. The guide dismounted, kneeling beside him, offering quiet words. The mare lowered her head, nudging the boy's shoulder gently. A tiny smile bloomed on his face. Healing, he realized, was often borrowed from others. As spring crept closer, grass pierced the snow in patches. The mare trotted with newfound vigor, tail banner-like behind her. Her steps were lighter, unburdened by invisible chains. The guide matched her energy, laughter slipping from him like warmth. One dawn, he led her up the ridge again, not to search, but to remember. The sun rose, with gold spilling over the peaks. Birds wheeled overhead, sketching arcs against the sky. The mare stood tall at his side, breath steady. He whispered his sister's name into the wind, letting it carry the sound without drowning it. "I'm still here," he murmured, "because you were here first." In the hush that followed, something shifted inside him, like snow falling from a branch, revealing new growth beneath. On their way home, townsfolk waved openly.
A few even clapped his shoulder.
Forgiveness was a slow river, but it was finally flowing. That evening, the mare trotted eagerly in the paddock, mane lifting with each joyful stride. The guide leaned against the fence, watching her move. Gone was the trembling stillness. Gone was the statue carved by fear. In its place stood motion, alive, spirited, unafraid. The thaw wasn't over, but enough ice had melted for something green to breathe again. A week later, sunrise rolled across the peaks like spilled gold, warming the last stubborn patches of snow. The guide stood beside the mare at the base of the ridge where townsfolk had gathered, voices hushed beneath the clear sky. Today they would complete what winter had delayed: recovery, closure, farewell. The missing rider's family clutched each other, grief softened at the edges by time and thaw. The mare shifted her weight, uneasy but resolute, as if she knew her presence mattered here. The search captain approached with measured steps. "We'll need your lead," he said, nodding respectfully. Suspicion had drained from his eyes, replaced with quiet trust. The guide swallowed, feeling the weight of the request settle into his bones. He mounted the mare, and she stepped forward without hesitation, hooves finding each hold with practiced care. The trail felt different now, less like a wound, more like a scar. They ascended in gentle silence, breath pluming in soft white clouds. Meltwater pooled along the path, reflecting shards of sky. The mare's ears flicked toward distant echoes, but her stride never faltered. Behind them, the townsfolk followed on foot, lanterns dim in the growing daylight. At the ravine, the thaw had widened the opening, revealing the final resting place with solemn clarity. The guide dismounted, hands trembling slightly. The mare stood behind him, head bowed. Together, they waited while the search party worked with reverent care, retrieving what the mountain had held. When the rider's family stepped forward, sobs broke like ice under sunlight. The guide turned away, giving them space, staring into the ravine's quiet depth. He felt grief, not sharp, but deep and tired. Yet beneath it, something else moved. Acceptance, a soft touch nudged his back. The mare pressed her muzzle against him, breath warm. He placed a palm on her cheek, closing his eyes. In her calm, he found steadiness. In her patience, forgiveness, not only for the rider, for his sister, and for himself. When the procession returned toward town, the guide lingered at the ridge's edge. He whispered into the wind, the words simple and small. "I'm sorry I didn't ride beside you." The breeze carried the words away, not to bury them, but to free them. Snowmelt trickled, sounding like quiet applause. He mounted again, letting the mare choose their descent. Her steps were light, almost joyful, tail lifting with each stride. The family waited at the trail's base, offering thanks through tears. The guide simply nodded. Gratitude didn't need many words. Later in town, someone placed a hand on his shoulder. Then another. Simple gestures, but each warmed a place winter had claimed. The blacksmith offered repairs without charge. The baker handed him a loaf still steaming. Children stared in awe at the mare, whispering tales of her bravery. She tolerated their gentle pats, closing her eyes as if savoring the attention she had once feared. As twilight settled, lantern light reflected off puddles and thawed paths. The guide rode the mare home at a slow trot, the rhythmic clop of hooves steady as a heartbeat. When they reached the paddock, he dismounted and loosened the saddle with calm, practiced hands. She leaned against him, weight gentle but grounding. He pressed his forehead to hers, a silent vow passing between them. No more standing still. Inside, he hung the recovered leather pieces on a hook near his sister's old scarf. Two stories, tangled by storm and silence, now resting side by side. He lit a candle beneath them. Its flame wavered, then steadied, like breath finding rhythm again. Outside, the mare pawed the earth, tossing her mane, eager to run. He opened the gate, watching her gallop beneath a violet sky. Snowmelt splashed beneath her hooves, droplets scattering like sparks. A debt had been repaid, not in grand gestures, but in steps taken together across thawing ground. Spring did not rush up the mountain. It settled quietly, as though testing the ground it meant to heal. Patches of green threaded through thinning snow, bright as breath after long silence. The trail guide stepped outside each morning to watch color return. Soft petals pushing through icy soil, pine needles unfurling with shy resilience. The mare grazed near the fence line, tail swaying like a slow metronome, her posture loose and unburdened. She lifted her head whenever he approached, a soft nicker humming from her throat. Each day they rode a little farther, not to search nor to outrun memory, but simply to move. Meltwater gurgled along the trail, pooling in shallow basins that reflected ribbons of sky. Birds followed their path, wings whispering above. The mare no longer hesitated at the ridge's crest. Instead, she stopped there with deliberate pride, surveying the valley below as if claiming it. The guide sat quietly in the saddle, letting sunlight soak into his coat, and felt something gentle settle in his chest. In town, strangers no longer stared with wary eyes. They greeted him with nods, with small smiles. The blacksmith rebuilt an old horseshoe stand near the square, painting it the color of wildflowers. Children gathered to watch the mare, daring to reach out and touch her flank. She stood calmly, lowering her head to their level, her breath warm on eager fingers. The guide watched from a short distance, shoulders unknotted, admiring the ease blooming in front of him. One morning, a folded letter arrived from the missing rider's family. Their handwriting trembled along the page, offering gratitude, forgiveness, and a single request to place a marker at the ravine's edge. The guide tucked the letter into his coat, heart thrumming. That evening, he rode with the mare along twilight-kissed trails. At the ravine, he placed a carved wooden plaque in the earth, pressing his palm against its warm grain. The mare stood beside him, ears forward. Wind swept across the ridge, carrying the scent of thawed soil. It felt like an answer. Days softened into weeks. The guide began offering trail lessons to children eager to explore safe paths, teaching them how to read the weather in the tilt of clouds, how to listen for danger in the hush between gusts. The mare stood patiently beside him, demonstrating calm in the face of shifting shadows. Parents watched from the tree line, grateful. In their pride, the guide glimpsed reflections of his sister's spark, alive in every curious child who dared to ride. At dusk, He walked to the cabin's front porch, lantern glowing like captured sunlight. He hung the missing rider's repaired bridle beside his sister's old scarf, both fluttering gently in the breeze. Not ghosts, reminders. Their threads didn't tug him backward anymore. They pointed forward toward trails yet unwritten. Night unfurled in deep indigos, stars stitching themselves into quiet patterns overhead. The mare grazed near the fence, hooves sinking into soft earth. The guide sat on the porch, guitar resting across his lap, fingers brushing strings with hesitant grace. He played the tune his sister loved, each note falling like petals over the valley. The mare lifted her head, ears swiveling, as though recognizing the song's shape. Her tail flicked in rhythm. Something in the music untangled, easing a corner of the wound that had once defined him. When morning returned, he saddled the mare without hesitation. No trembling, no freeze. They climbed the ridge, wind gentle against their faces. From the summit, the valley unfolded, vibrant and alive. He watched sunlight ripple across roofs, smoke curling from chimneys, trails crisscrossing like veins of possibility. The mare nudged his boot, urging him forward. He smiled softly.
"All right," he whispered. They descended, hooves drumming a steady cadence on thawed ground.
The path no longer felt haunted. It felt familiar. When they reached the clearing where snowmelt pooled, he dismounted and let the mare drink. Ripples spread outward, touching every edge of the pond, just as healing touched every corner of his life. On the ride home, he did not trace old trails. He chose new ones, narrow, hopeful, bordered by blooming wildflowers. The mare trotted beside streams swollen with promise, her mane catching sunlight like threads of copper. At the cabin, he unsaddled her and let her roam freely. She galloped across the field, powerful and present, scattering dew like diamonds. The guide laughed, quiet, genuine, surprised by his own voice echoing through the trees. When she returned, he rested his forehead against hers. Their breaths mingled, warm as spring wind. They were no longer statues beneath winter's grip. They were movement, forward, alive, unafraid.